Hey, y'all, Big Tim here again. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Old School and Bass with Big Tim. Today, we're going to try to help some of the high school anglers that have some tournaments coming up at Lake Cumberland. I happen to love Lake Cumberland. I go down there, I don't want to say all the time, but pretty frequently. And have had great success down there. It's a love-hate relationship. I've had great practice days. I've had incredible, just fun fishing trips. And most of my tournaments have not been very good. I have won two, I think, at least. I know I won at least two tournaments down there, both the same year. And we'll talk about what bait I use there. But for the high school people, I did research your rules a little bit, and I did not see anything that outlawed the Alabama rig. This happens to be the Yum Flash Mob Junior, okay, with a bunch of Kitech swim baits on it. I didn't see any limitations. I know in the BFLs, you're limited to 3 hooks. I did not see any limitations for high school anglers. I'm not a fan of this bait because it's so heavy. I think in high school competition, I think it gives an unfair advantage to some of the people that are more skilled. I shouldn't say skilled. Been fishing a longer time, because this bait is very heavy to throw. You have to throw this on baitcaster. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to have a nice stiffer rod, a good medium heavy, and heavier line. You know, this is not something that you can throw on spinning equipment very efficiently. You know, this is probably going to be one of the number one baits to throw down there. I call it the chandelier, as you can see why. But it weighs a lot, and it's tough to throw on lighter equipment. So some of you beginner anglers, you may want to think about not throwing that. It's going to cause you a lot of problems. The other thing to consider is the fact that we have so many trees grown up at Cumberland. That thing will hang up quick and easy. So you can opt for a smaller version. And when I say smaller version, this is basically a swim bait on one hook. Brian Thrift won the FLW tournament on a very similar lure setup like this last year. Caught a bunch of smallmouth. Basically, you just cast it out, let it sink to the bottom, and start reeling it in slowly. So it's pretty simple. This happens to be a Kitech swim bait. They're not real expensive. You can get a bag of 10 of them, I think, for $5, and then just get you a shaky head or any kind of. This happens to be a shaky head, but you can get any kind of small 1/4 ounce, 3/16 or ball head, smaller ball head jig. Okay. Another thing we already talked about briefly is jerk baits. Jerk bait will probably be a big player early in the season. This is the KVD slash that we talked about once before. And since I did mention it, I'm bringing out the Mega Bass just to show you. Okay, this is the Mega Bass 110. Like I said, they're $25, but they really catch fish. This is Pro Blue. And then we also have the Mega Bass 110+1. This one runs a little bit deeper. It's still $25. It's still Pro Blue. But I'm a big believer in the KVDs. We also talked about different crankbaits in one of the other episodes. I talked about this one being one of my favorite crankbaits, and it's because I won 2 tournaments in 3 weeks at Lake Cumberland on this bait. 2 different sizes here. This one is what they call the fat-free shad fingerling, and it runs a little shallower. It runs about 10 feet deep. This is the fat-free shad junior, and it runs about 12 to 14 feet. I used this one week and this one another week when the water level went up. I had to use the bigger one when the water level went up. And when the water went down, I used the smaller one. I had one magic spot that you could, it's no joke, you could feel the bait coming through the fish. I thought it was a tree. Turns out it was fish, because when we came back and fished the spot later, we didn't feel the trees. But I did real well on it, and it's been a successful bait for me at Lake Cumberland ever since. Spring, fall, winter, I've caught fish on it almost every time. Again, fat-free shad, fingerling, and Junior. This color is called Dance's Citrus Shad. We already spoke in another episode about the Strike King Series 3, the Chili Crawl. That would be another good choice. And the Spro RK Crawlers. You know, red. There's a couple of really good colors. There's a brown, a ghost brown that's nice too. Chartreuse. I forget what it's called. Chartreuse Crawl, something like that. Those are good colors. Depending on the water situation, spinnerbaits can be a big player. Last year when we went down, when Brian Thrift won that tournament, a friend of mine and I were down there throwing spinnerbaits and catching fish like nobody's business. At that time, we were throwing twin willow blades on spinnerbaits. Now, we were catching fish on the ones that had painted blades. I think I was throwing one with one white and chartreuse, and I think he was throwing one with two white. Didn't really seem to matter. Well, yeah, it did. He caught them better than I did. But painted blades sometimes will be a big ticket. That day, if I'm not mistaken, it was pretty overcast, so maybe that's why the painted blades work better. These are gold and copper, or gold and silver, I mean. Okay, this happens to be a War Eagle spinnerbait. It is my favorite spinnerbait. Well, for lakes. I've got a favorite river spinnerbait. This isn't the model of it, but Tim Poe, a local guy here in Alexandria, Kentucky, makes these spinnerbaits. It's got a special little unique head that comes through wood cover real nice. It's a great little river spinnerbait. This happens to be a Colorado combination. This would come in handy if the water is muddy. If the water's fairly clear, this is a good choice. Spinnerbaits, and when I say just throw them and wind them, that's pretty much what you do. But if you learn to twitch these baits, whether it's a crankbait, whether it's a spinnerbait, jerkbait, whatever, if you learn to impart your own unique action into them, you'll find that they catch better than just casting them and reeling them straight in. So you can pretty much just cast these and reel them straight in, but if you twitch the rod or pause them, just do anything, you know, kind of erratic, you'll make the baits catch more fish for you. Another big player, and this is what I'm going to recommend for some of the people that are less experienced at tournament fishing, and particularly at bigger lakes. This is one of the newest crazes going around, even though it's been around for years. It's called the Ned Rig, okay? All it is, this happens to be just a green pumpkin Senko on a jigged hook, okay? There you go. The lighter, the better. This is a little bit bigger than the original TRD. This happens to be an actual Senko versus the TRDs. The TRDs can be very beneficial because they tend to float straight up and down. And they're a little bit smaller than this. Green pumpkin is probably the #1 color to think about down there. But if you've got a bright blue sky day and the water is clear, which who knows if the water is going to be clear, it's up pretty bad right now. Watermelon, some variants of watermelon will be a good color for you to choose. So green pumpkin and watermelon. Jigs are always another good bait to use. This is a 3/8 model jig. This color happens to be green pumpkin with an Alabama crawl, Paca crawl as a trailer. Alabama crawl is a good color to use early. Green pumpkin's always a good color. Early in the year, Alabama crawl and pumpkin seem to work real well. I guess it's because when those crayfish come out of hibernation, they may be a little bit lighter colored. I do real well on pumpkin and Alabama crawl early in the year. Another good jig trailer that you can use, or you can Texas rig it, is a Reaction Innovation Sweet Beaver. Okay, this is a really nice little lure. This is Smalley Beaver. Yeah, Smalley Beaver is what I mean to say. Green pumpkin is a great color to use. Another couple great colors to use down there is one called Hematoma. It's basically black and blue, just like a bruise. And one called, and I hate saying this on this video, but Dirty Sanchez. Dirty Sanchez is basically green pumpkin and chartreuse underneath. And it's a really good color when the water's clear at Lake Cumberland. You can Texas rig it, or you can put it on a jig and make it the jig trailer. And when we say Texas rig, this is a Texas rig. Okay, this is where you put the hook through the lure and make it more weedless. This is my #1 bait. I've caught more fish on this one lure and this one color than everything else put together that we've ever talked about. And this is the baby brush hog, green pumpkin. It's Texas rigged. Like I said, you can Texas rig the baby brush hog, the beaver. This is something that works real well and when the water's fairly clear, green pumpkin. If the water's real clear and it's a bright sunshiny day, you might think about pumpkin or even watermelon. Those are also good colors. Another really good bait, if there happens to be a little bit of chop on the water, this bait seems to shine a little bit better when it's a little noisier outside. And, you know, there's wind, things like that. This is the Ultra Vibe Speed Crawl. It's a bite-sized little bait, perfect for bass. You can Texas rig this. You can put it on the jig trailer or a trailer for a jig. You know, that's a great little jig trailer. Again, colors, green pumpkin, bright sunshiny day, watermelon, maybe pumpkin, and Alabama crawl as well. So there's a couple other baits that I don't have out here. One that can come into play later on in the year at Lake Cumberland is a jerkbait, a soft plastic jerkbait, much like a Zoom fluke. Zoom flukes are awesome in that clear water, but it needs to warm up a little bit. So we're thinking mid to late April, you can start thinking about a Zoom fluke. Colors on that, you know, it's hard to beat white, but other shad type colors. Zoom fluke is a great bait, or fluke style bait, I should say. But flukes are probably the most popular to use. Later on in the year, starting in April, after the fish start thinking about getting shallow to bed, depending on when this weather ever breaks, a buzz bait can really be a fun bait to throw. I don't have any out here because I wanted to key on the early season. And I'm sure there's something else that I'm thinking or not thinking about or not remembering for early season, but I want to go back to some of the less experienced anglers. If this is your first tournament and you're using spin cast equipment or spinning reel and you're not a great caster and you're really just starting out, tie on a Ned rig. I think that's going to get you the most bites. I would love to have a Ned rig that has a wire weed guard to keep it more weedless. I haven't seen one yet. I don't even know. We may have them at our store. I don't know. I haven't looked into it, researched it that in depth. But you probably need some sort of weed guard, especially with those trees down there. But I know I got one guy that I work with that he loves the Ned rig. He actually fished high school tournaments down there a few years ago and did real well with the Ned rig. And I tease him about the Ned rig a lot because, you know, for me, I'm not a big fan because I'm generally trying to catch bigger fish. But for high school tournaments down there, you generally are allowed to weigh in 12-inch fish. Whereas when an adult goes down for a regular tournament, it has to be 15-inch on largemouth and 18-inch on smallmouth. So a Ned rig isn't really going to help me much. But for you guys, you high school anglers, I think you really need to consider the Ned rig. I think it's going to be the easiest lure for you to throw and get a lot of bites. Also, the smallie beaver. You know, you can Texas rig this. You can put it on a shaky head. Oh, and that's something else we forgot to talk about, a shaky head worm. Shaky head worm is tough to beat down there too. So those give you some options, something to consider. You may look at other things. Once tournament time gets a little bit closer, I'll have a better idea of what the situation, what the water is going to look like. And we may do an update and give you some more suggestions. But until then, this gives you a good idea to what to think about when you go to Lake Cumberland early in the year. Thanks for tuning in. Again, make sure you share with your friends. Try to get them to subscribe. The more subscribers we got, the better we are getting the word out. And if you have any questions, You know, hit me up at the bottom. I'll try my best to answer them as quickly as I can. Sometimes I'll do a video submission. But thanks, and we'll see you next time.